Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Noble Manhattan USA East Coast Coaching Support Group meeting. It might be morning where you're coming from having breakfast, so I really appreciate everyone coming in and joining for our meeting today. I want to especially welcome all the Hippocrates alumni, as well as the Noble Manhattan coaches and coach trainees, as well as any coaches from other institutes. And of course, all the people who are just curious about what it is that we do here. Just to give you a little bit of background, Noble Manhattan is one of Europe's leading coach training companies. And of course, the Hippocrates Health Institute is a world-renowned leader in the progressive health movement. And if you're interested in learning about the Hippocrates lifestyle, please go to their website. Same thing if you want to learn about coaching. So we welcome you to check this out if you're curious about learning more. However, you don't need to be a coach to join us in the meetings. My name is Beatrice Phillips. I am a Hippocrates health educator. I'm also a Hippocrates lifestyle medicine coach, as well as a Noble Manhattan coach practitioner and accredited coach by the IAPCM. My team members, Petra, Maria, Michael, and Emily, are also Hippocrates lifestyle medicine coaches. And then we have our ambassadors, Susan and Glenn. And we do these meetings every month to create a safe space. And we're going to explain a little bit about that more in a second. What we do, we have a phenomenal speaker today that I know you're all eager to hear very much. And once he's done with his presentation and the Q&A session, we take a 3-minute break and we go into what's called breakout rooms. Now, these breakout rooms are a safe space for us to be in. Anything that's said in there stays in the room. And the rooms are there for like-minded people to meet. And if you have any challenges that you may not be able to share with your family or your close friends, then this is the space where you can go in and share, and we can have a mastermind session. And other people might have a solution that you haven't thought about. And if you're lucky enough to have a coaching room, because we have a lot of people here today, so we're not going to be able to cover each room with a coach, then they can help you maybe with some coaching questions and open another door that you didn't see before. So, but without further ado, I would like to hand this over to Petra, our VP, so she can introduce our speaker this evening. Petra, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Petra Butler, and I'm delighted to have the chance to introduce our phenomenal guest speaker today, Dr. Brian Clement. Brian Clement has spearheaded the international progressive health movement for more than 3.5 decades. He's the director of the renowned Hippocrates Health Institute in West Palm Beach, Florida, the world's foremost complementary residential health center. Over the last half-century, he and his team have pioneered clinical research and training in disease prevention using hundreds of thousands of participants who provided volumes of data, giving Clement a privileged insight into the lifestyle required to avert disease, enhance longevity, and maintain vitality. Their findings have provided the basis for Hippocrates' progressive state-of-the-art treatments and programs for health maintenance and recovery, their life transformation program. Brian Clement has written over 20 books focused on health, spirituality, and natural healing. Among them are Living Foods for Optimum Health, Longevity, Life Force, which Dr. Colin Campbell calls one of the most important books ever written on nutrition. Supplements Exposed, published in 2010, reveals the pharmaceutical fraud rampant in the sales, production, and distribution of worthless and harmful vitamin pills. Additionally, he has authored 3 volumes for the scientific community medicine. One of his most popular books is his 7 Keys to Lifelong Sexual Vitality, being touted as an important guide to the biology of love. His recent offerings, Dairy Deception, spotlights the hazards of milk, eggs, and their offsprings. Brian Clement is a devoted husband and a caring father of 4, who along with his wife, Dr. Anna Maria Gans Clement, co-directs the Hippocrates Health Institute. In addition to his research studies, Dr. Clement conducts conferences worldwide on attaining health and creating longevity, giving humanity a roadmap for redirecting, enriching, and extending their lives. A licensed nutritionist, Brian Clement is a graduate of the University of Science, Arts, Technology, where he earned his PhD. Please note that we will all have a designated Q&A session with Brian after the presentation, which will be led by Dr. Maria Tatum. Please utilize the chat to ask questions so that it's more streamlined, and I'm sure there will be plenty. We would also like to kindly ask you to keep your microphone on mute. So finally, to hand it over to Dr. Brian Clement. He's just a fascinating person, and we are all in for something special today. Thank you very, very much for taking the time tonight for us. Thank you, Dr. Clement.
Nice to be here with you on this beautiful day in this crazy, insane world that we all live in today. And so hopefully we'll be speaking to all of you about methodologies that I've had the privilege to learn through working with people here at the Institute over the last 5 decades. And we also see that there's an ever-growing group of people globally that are finally awakening to the fact that we've got to take our lives back. We've got to become responsible for every thought, every action, and every choice that we make. So this all starts in your mind. And as a doctor of nutrition, when I was just a young man, I thought if you changed a diet, that was enough. But I recognize that some people would eat perfectly well and exercise at an Olympic level and still suffered. And I was forced, not that I was willing at that moment, but I was forced to recognize that our attitudes and our perceptions really govern our lives, our well-being, and the success, or unfortunately, the problems that we have. So we're going to address all of that, and I'm going to tie it together for you tonight through 2 windows. The window of nutrition and the importance it has in allowing a brain to function correctly. The brain is an extraordinary organ in the body. It is basically mostly water and essential fats. The cells that are there are almost even. Glial cells, which are structural cells, and then neurons. So when you're sitting and listening to me right now and understanding these sounds that become words, that become sentences, become feelings, that's neurons that are doing that. Now, it wasn't too long ago at medical schools, they didn't even speak about how the body spoke to the brain. But finally, in the late 1990s, there was enough data, tsunamis, overwhelming amount of data, that they couldn't not look at that and focus in on it. So many of you have felt this before. You come home from work, you've had a very busy day, and you and your partner, or you and your children and family, decide you want to go out for a walk. Intellectually, you're ready to do it. But you're on that couch, and you go to stand up, and what does the body say to you? Not today. That's the neurons that are running up and down the nervous system from the bottom of your feet right up to the brain stem here that is speaking to the brain. So the picture I want to give you is this wonderful tennis game that is being played by the top level tennis players in the world. That's when you're healthy. That's when the body and the brain are communicating perfectly well. And all of the words are enriching and nourishing, not only on a physical basis, but on an emotional basis. So it's really interesting when you look at this. Now, obviously, the people I'm speaking to tonight are a little bit more open-minded, and possibly more conscious than the average people out there. So you would understand, without me even telling you, that the amount of nourishment that you have in your cells would determine how that communication, how that tennis game was being played. Is it going to be the first day that somebody ever played tennis, and that's most people, fumbling around with a ball, hitting it out so that you have to go and collect it in the grass? Or is it going to be a world-class Wimbledon game? That is determined upon what you nourish your body with. Now, there's a lot of ideas out there today. And there's one Hippocrates Health Institute that founded lifestyle medicine in 1956. Before there was alternative healthcare, holistic healthcare, complementary healthcare, there was Hippocrates. And our founder, Ann Wigmore, had such insight and wisdom. She was connected, that she knew what was lacking then, and sadly today still, is self-care. You knowing how to take care of yourself. We still have the old paradigm. You have the mainstream allopathic doctors that, by the way, are part of the industry that has become the #3 killer in most of the developed world. The #1 is cancer or heart disease. So either cancer or heart disease. The #3 is medical mistakes and pharmaceutical deaths. So that group of people, we pretty much know from that one statement what they are potentially capable of doing. And let me preface what I just said. I think most of the men and women as physicians are good people with the right intent in a bad system that gave them the wrong tools. Then you have the alternative doctors, as we call them. They no longer inject large amounts of drugs into you or give you pills and prescriptions. They'll inject large amounts of chemical supplements into you. They'll do a very similar thing, and you're comfortable with it because they're not as problematic, possibly. They're not going to give you something that may outright stop your life. So everything is moderation today. But Ann Wigmore, 65 years ago, recognized that it's all about choices, which I discussed earlier. And if you're making bad nutritional choices and bad life choices, the stress of bad life choices and constant perpetual failure and the unbelievable biochemical stress of eating chemically laden animal-based food eventually breaks down the system. Sometimes it's called neurological disorders. Sometimes it's called cancer. Sometimes it's called diabetes, Parkinson's disease. And then the viral diseases come in because a weak body, by the way, can't resist microbes. It was built to. And so now, within a weak immune system, a weak army of cells, viruses come in and seed themselves and grow and even have the potentiality to kill. Bacteria is the same. Parasites the same. Amoeba is the same. And we've been watching what happens when you change that process, that march to death, as I call it. When you remove the stresses of attitude, lethargia, that means lack of exercise, and bad nutrition, the body starts to rebound and respond. Think of this very simply. How many of you have ever had a cut? Some of you even very deep wounds. If I ask you to tell me exactly where that cut was now, you'd have a difficult time because it disappeared. The same way that the body can heal a deep gash, it can heal every disease known to man. Just this morning, I was reading a scientific journal out of Europe that was suggesting we're over-treating and over-drugging people, and that's maybe why it's a #3 killer in the developed world today. So with all of that said, let's move on now with brain, food, and most important, consciousness. Consciousness isn't something that's elusive. It doesn't make you a more awake and a more spiritual person. It makes you a more capable person. Unconsciousness means you don't know what's going on. Consciousness means you know what's going on. Now, how many of you really feel fully conscious all of the time? Well, I can't raise my hand with that one. I feel conscious most of the time, but in this crazy world where you're being stressed by insanity 24 hours a day, you get diverted. Your attention gets diverted. So we've got to really use certain tools to get well and to be healthy. So the human brain, look at that extremely beautiful organ. It looks like a cauliflower, but it's not something as tasty as a cauliflower. It has much more taste. It can make you the most extraordinary human being on the earth. It can give you the ability to do anything you dream of. It's the harbor of your imagination. It's the epicenter of your love. All taste, all feelings, all emotions are generated in, around, and through that extremely beautiful organ. Let's all give it a hand out there. Come on. The big star tonight, the brain. Now, look at your mood. Have you noticed that sometimes you have good days and bad days, as we call them? Well, I can promise you, when we've tested this here with our medical team at the Institute in West Palm Beach, on bad days, testing gut flora, the bioterrain as we now call it, it's finally emerging as something important, even in the depths of conventional science. We find that there's an imbalance in the bacteria in your intestinal tract on those bad days. Now, the intestines is extremely significant. Through the evolutionary process, the very first thing that grew in a human being was the gut. We grew out from the gut. Our arms, our legs, our head, our neck, all of that came after the gut. And the gut bacteria comes from the earth. In religious philosophy, they say something that really is true scientifically and biologically factual. We come from the earth and we go to the earth. Now, in that gut, when you have healthy bacteria, your whole life, who could be a long and healthy life, will have a friend, because 80% of your immune system comes from that gut bacteria. Now, the other interesting thing that psychiatrists were not trained, unfortunately, at medical school is that 90% of serotonin comes from the gut. So for that 90% of serotonin that we call happy juice, when people are depressed, when people have schizophrenia, when people have bipolar, malaise, melancholy, they always have too little serotonin. You have to have healthy bacteria to manufacture that exceptional joy chemistry. And if you don't have a healthy gut, guess what? You're not going to be a happy camper. So the first thing we do here at Hippocrates, besides help people with psychotherapy, we actually look at that through the scanning that we do, the cyber scan. It gives minute details. In some exceptional cases, we actually do fecal testing that we send out to find when the imbalance is so big, what we have to do to rein it in, to get it back together. So we start with your joy, your happiness, or your sadness and confusion with cleaning up the gut with healthy bacteria. Now here's a beautiful part of this story. When you're born and your mother lovingly and correctly breastfeeds you, in the minutes after you come out of her womb and you start to suckle her nipple, colostrum comes out. It looks like tar. This colostrum is what nature and the universe has created to encode and seed in your body perfectly healthy bacteria that will last there forever if you live healthy lifestyles, even if you live to 120 years old. Now, sadly, many of you were not breastfed, and even if you were, most of the time we've consumed chemicals in our food, inhaled it in our air, consumed it in our water, gotten it from our polyester and nylon clothing, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, genetic modification. And MIT did a study 48 years ago that actually showed 2 sodas will permanently wipe out that extraordinary balance that the universe gave you to have a healthy immunity forever. The second wonderful thing that we have to understand is no matter how bad you may be right now, how confused you may be because of this right now, we can create, through supplementation and an occasional use of fermented food, a renewed bioterrain. Terrain meaning landscape, and bio mean biological terrain that's balanced, like the mountains or like hills with fields. Picture your intestine being like that. It can always come back. Now, it gets to be really damaged when people do long-term antibiotics, which kill it, or chemotherapy or radiation. But even in those cases, since I've worked with tens of thousands like this, you can renew it. Another term I'd like to bring up, because they like to sell you products more than tell you facts, is prebiotics. So this may be really interesting to you. Prebiotics are literally cellulose from plants. So nobody who eats a healthy, organic, and certainly raw plant-based diet needs to buy a container of prebiotics. It's a joke. Now, with that said, we now know through honest anthropology, it's almost an oxymoron because there's very little of that. It's status quo anthropology that began in the middle of the 1800s when in Europe, they started to say we were hunters and gatherers. It's now been blown out of the water. We were gatherers. And even today, when we sit here and speak together all over the world, 6 out of 10 people on Earth at this moment are primarily plant-based eaters. The minorities are animal consumers, animal food consumers. So we were gathering plants to constantly feed and seed that healthy bioterrain, to get our immune system engaged, to get our happy juices going. So we had bigger vision, greater imagination, and most important, the happiness that led us on and encouraged us to live a life worth living. So you get that from raw plant-based foods. Once you cook that plant, even if it's organic, the cellulose fiber is diminished to very little good effect. So even vegans can have a problem if the majority of their diet is cooked. What we know is some of the statistics today are shocking. Whether you're 2025, 7 million people in this country alone are going to have Alzheimer's disease. This means they don't know they're married, they don't know they have children, they don't know what work they did. They're completely in a world of their own. This starts with the intestines. There are 3 major factors and a 4th, which is an instigator that creates dementia and then Alzheimer's. The first is a lack of B12. Over the last 35 years, I've been studying this deeply and globally. we've established that 70% of the world's population lack B12. Now, I'm not going to labor over that tonight, but you may want to watch one of my other videos out of Hippocrates TV, or an organization I helped to found called The Real Truth About Health. You can tune in and see that. But we discovered that our intestines are not anatomically the same as they were hundreds of years ago. The part of the intestine that would harbor the plant-based foods and culture into the probiotic that we call B12 no longer exists. So it's one of those nutrients that are required on a regular, consistent basis. We also discovered over the last 35 years that 8% higher incidence of B12 deficiency with people who are meat, and meat means fish, chicken, pork, wild game, and dairy and egg consumers. 8% higher incidence. Vegans have less B12 deficiency, and the ones who have the least are raw vegans. Once again, why? Because B12 is not a B vitamin. It's literally a soil-based microorganism. And so start taking that. Number 2, Udo Rasmussen, who you may know from his Udo oil, who single-handedly, as a non-scientist, when he recovered, recognized the importance of essential fats and loaded up his van and drove all over North America, then all over the world, and told health food stores about the significance of essential fatty acids. Boy, was he ahead of his time, and man, was he right. It was 1928 we discovered omega-6, and not until 1981 we discovered omega-3. There's others, omega-9, etc. He has told me that he's looked at thousands and thousands and thousands of MRIs, photographs of the brain. He said 98% of people do not have enough essential fats that, again, create the structure of the brain. Mostly fat and water, spongy fat. If you have gaps or openings or even holes in the brain, it leads to Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and even memory loss, the very early stages of this. It is not normal as we age to lose our memory. Unfortunately, with our sick way of living and eating, it's normal that you see it happen, but it's not a normal phenomenon. Nature is perfect. It didn't create a sick human being as we age. Next, we're going to look at heart attacks and strokes. They're still killing about half the people around the developed world. They directly relate to the brain, and we can reduce this. The work that's been done by a lot of my colleagues has proven this, and if you clean up the heart, you clean up the head, and you clean up the libido. So when we start to recognize the science that's behind all of this, non-scientists cry out and say, why don't we discuss this? Why doesn't my healthcare professional know this? Even my nutritionist. Certainly not my medical doctor, or even alternative doctors. What I've usually seen over the half century I've had the privilege to work with people like you is that the alternative doctor gets on the train of the latest, greatest popular book. Now we're in the period where it's about don't eat seeds. It's okay to eat chicken, but don't eat seeds. We came out of the paleo period now. And before that, the blood type period. And before that, the Atkins period. Why? Because people don't have an attention span. Their gut and brain are not healthy. So they're bouncing from one thing to another, cannot stay focused and clear, and don't maintain a lifestyle of integrity long enough to see how it builds like building blocks. Let me tell you, when you do this, it's remarkable. 80% of our guests return here. Some of them I know as well as my own family. And what I've seen is no less than a miracle. People continue as they age to get healthier and stronger. Next year, it will be my 70th year. I honestly feel like a 20-year-old young man. When you start to look at the work of my friend Dr. Esselstyn, that I've had the privilege with Anna Maria and his wife to travel around Europe and lecture, and together we helped to create the very first lifestyle medicine graduate degree in Europe. We can get a master's or doctorate degree. We spent many hours as we drove from place to place, university to university, discussing the miraculous work that he did, where he had almost 100% results cleaning up arteries. Now, remember, when you clean up an artery, more blood, more oxygen, and guess what? It all leads to the brain. You have these little vessels, capillaries, that are called the blood-brain barrier. But if you don't have a clean, flowing bloodstream that moves through your veins and capillaries, it doesn't get into the brain, you reduce oxygen, and it's another killer of memory. We also are going to talk about sugar here. That's the instigator I mentioned. Sugar, we now call, and Anna was way ahead of me on this 25, 30 years ago. I used to correct her incorrectly when she used to call diabetes type 3 memory loss. Today, the evidence is here. Sugar will cross-circuit your memory. So lacking B12, having a structural problem with the essential fats in the brain, and sugar. The last thing I'm going to mention to you is brain use. Neuron scientists have now taught us correctly over the last 20 years that when you use your brain and stretch it and learn languages and learn how to play an instrument and interchange with people, that you literally maintain a memory and can grow a memory, even at 100 years old. When we start to see all of the different aspects of being healthy, needless to say, universities around the world are giving us the evidential science that we possibly saw in clinical settings like at the Institute here, but didn't really see in the literature. Today we have both the literature and the evidence. It's up to you to get off your butt and start to become completely engaged in self-care, taking care of your life. Dairy food is one of the great problem creators when it comes to dementia. You talk about animal fat. In many of the things that I used to commonly eat, ice cream, whipped cream, they had more animal fat than pork and red meat. And most common meat out there, unfortunately, has more fat than red meat, and that's chicken. And dairy food is right there. Cheese, can you imagine? They take the creamy part of the milk and they make the cheese. What that does to clog up your veins and brain. And I can tell you, a high percentage of you listening around the world have allergies to it that create almost an ADD, dyslexic situation. Can you imagine the havoc that milk consumption plays on the bioterrain in your intestinal tract? Fermenting and the high sugar content that's in the milk itself inherently. Stay away from this. This is a real saboteur for your memory. Time and time again, we see that this is not a puzzle. It's a series of common sense approaches to lifestyle. So we're going to review now what I've said about the brain, and we're going to talk about things that may be good for you. We know that the brain can be helped from memory loss by eating perfectly good food. But reviewing what we said, meat is a problem. Lack of B12 is a problem. And don't think if you eat meat, you get B12, because once you cook a meat, that bacteria dies. I'm not suggesting you eat raw meat. People come here with parasites, amoebas, and the same maladies, even if they don't cook the meat. Heart disease, cancers, etc. We said the essential fats, which you only get from plants. The top essential fat is algae, both freshwater algae and saltwater algae. That's missing, memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's, and unhappiness, malaise, as we talk. But how about asparagus? Asparagus is loaded with glutathione. Avocados are loaded with glutathione. And let me tell you something. When you start to eat these, you're going to see a major difference. Now, I was stunned. I was reading a journal of medicine a number of years ago, and Stanford University had done a brilliant study. I really I wish I was part of that research team. And they looked at what fed the neurons. Remember, the neurons are how you're listening to me right now and understanding what I'm saying. And they developed a package of nutrients. We took that to a drawing board, and a triple biochemist and I spent about 1 year and 8 months developing something we call LifeGive Conscious Brain. Of course, I thought I never needed it. I had a perfectly fine memory, and I do. But several years ago, I told that to Anna Maria, my wife, and she smiled. Now, when you've been married for as long as I have, you know what that means. And I started to take it. And I can tell you, this improved a good memory. Now I remember the subtleties and nuances and things I haven't thought about for 50, 60, almost 70 years in some cases. So these foods will help you, and sometimes supplements will. We also know that doing something like Luminosity, which is a brain stretching, brain developing program that you can sign up for on your computer, has helped people reverse this. One of the books I wrote for the Swiss 15 years ago was Longevity, and I spoke about the research that was being done at that point, of which has been grown and developed and better disseminated at this stage. Selenium that you get from things like Brazil nuts are amazing, and selenium's lacking in all food. Most organic plant-based food lacks selenium, since it was sucked out of the soil from bad farming practices over the last few generations. Matter of fact, about 90% of the topsoil in the world today has been depleted. And many parts of the world are becoming deserts that were the bread boxes that fed humanity before. We also talk about movement and exercise. The body systems require flow, circulation, oxygen. And I know from personal experience that we could take away 50% of depression. Listen to what I'm telling you, factual statement. 50% of depression if a person on a regular basis does aerobic exercise. That means a minimum of heart pounding, I'm sweating, 35 minutes, ideally 5 days a week. That's just to maintain. Now, if you really want to get endorphin activity and what we call a high, then you have to go longer than that. 7 days a week, I do aerobic exercise. 3 days a week for about 3 hours, I lift heavy weights. And I stretch every single day, and I do abdominal exercises, 800 to be exact, when I'm in the sauna, 365 days a year. That's as important for brain health and happiness and to get rid of insanity as eating healthy food is. Here's a story I'd like to talk to you about. Bonnie Lovett came here with a brain tumor that was larger in weight than her brain. Your brain's about 3 pounds to 3.5 pounds. She had a 4.5 pound tumor. When I first read the report from the National Institute of Health, I thought it was a typo. I thought it was impossible. How do you fit into the little skull something that's double the size of your brain with the brain included? And the doctors correctly told her, nowhere in the history of medicine, anywhere on the globe, has anyone recovered from this. It's an impossibility. Nobody recovers from this. We'll take it out, it will grow back, and the second time you'll have an 85% chance of dying. And if you, the one group of lucky people, you'll have a 10 to 15% chance. Third time you'll die. That was 15 years ago. She reverses by eating the Hippocrates living food diet, by moving, exercising, and finding a purposeful life. And that's how I'm going to end this conversation. So all of this is to nothing if we don't know why we're here. the purpose for us. Don't be confused, be impassioned. Find what you love and do it, and be uncompromising in that. Much of your sadness comes from being unfulfilled. Fulfillment and passion creates happiness and success, period. And I'll repeat this formula. This is not a personal opinion. This is a factual statement. Once again, fulfillment and passion. Fulfillment plus passion equals happiness and success. And I'm sure that's what all of us would want if we were asked. Who wouldn't want to be happy? Who wouldn't want to be successful? And it's up to you to do that. It's not genes. It's not happenstance. It's not good luck or bad luck. It's you. And you have the ability and the power as a human being to be a contributing member of the human race. And I challenge each and every one of you to do it, because we need it sorely today. The powers that be want to manipulate and control you, as you see. They want you to be a number and part of the program. We want you to create your own program and program yourself to expect the best, to do the maximum, and to have so much happiness that you spread it, and you will join the army of love that we started here 65 years ago. I also want to mention to you, on November the 21st, you can spend hours with me, starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You'll be seeing more about this. We're going to have a worldwide conference where I'm going to be speaking until either you're exhausted or I'm exhausted at that point. It's time to disseminate what the epicenter of the whole complementary healthcare movement, progressive health movement, has learned for the last 7 decades. So it's time that any of you that have questions, I'm more than happy to answer those questions. That's my favorite thing to do now.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was amazing, as usual. And there is over 27 questions, so let's just get started. Joyce wants to know about lectins because she saw it's dangerous for people, and she wants to know, how do you feel about eliminating lectins from someone's diet completely?
Well, again, that's the most popular book right now, Dr. Gundren. He's very popular, and you'll see him on the internet, you'll see him on television. And I have a lot of respect for a doctor that was literally a cardiologist at Loma Linda and was doing work, and he's certainly doing better than most doctors like him, so let's congratulate him. But boy, is he completely wrong on these chemicals. Now, back in the 1970s and 80s, when we first discovered these, it was really a magic story, because plants that were here hundreds and hundreds of millions of years before you and I, we've only showed up in this form, Homo sapiens, in about the last 10 or 11,000 years. And every plant, through nature, the universe, God, if you will, literally created natural insecticides. They're called enzyme inhibitors. Now, those plants did that so that that species or type of plant would never die. So the animal would never eat all of the plant. It would get sick. The bug would never eat all of the plant. It wasn't enough to kill the animal or the bug. It was enough to make them go away from the plant. Isn't that genius how the universe works? It's like an incredible story, as I said. What he's talking about is one of these enzyme inhibitors. So, for instance, when you juice some of these seed vegetables, the seeds are no longer there. You're just getting the nutritional part of it. But here we have the real secret. When you take the seed and germinate it, all of that is left behind. And when it's left behind, because that's the poison part of the plant, and the plant grows, and this beautiful little plant becomes a mother that can produce hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds. So I know that the way they make popular books today is tell you how bad something is. I'm going to tell you how good plant-based diets are. Someday I'd like to visit this doctor and have him come here to the Institute and see what has happened to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on a plant-based diet, by the way, that includes seeds.
Thank you so much. Also, Linda wants to know what your thoughts on high protein vegan diets, like 80 to 100 grams a day, so like she can lose weight.
Well, let's start with protein is really easy to understand when you look at the perfect example of what humans should be eating in a certain ratio. Now, I'm going to ask you out there, I can't get your answer because I don't hear you. What do you think that perfect example is? Mother's milk. Now, when else do you need more protein than your little tiny infant growing every single day until you're 25, you continue to grow? And what amount of protein is in mother milk? 5%. It's 90% complex carbohydrate, 5% protein, and 5% essential fatty acids, healthy fats. Isn't that remarkable? And they're telling you need 50 grams of protein a day, you need 100 grams of protein. I'll never forget, who's now a vegan, Arnold Schwarzenegger, how he literally talked about eating 700 grams of protein a day. No wonder he had to go and get his operation and have an organ replaced in him. So plant proteins are certainly a better source and easier to digest and utilize source than an animal protein. But on the other hand, you don't need astronomically high amounts. You need digestible, usable forms of protein. Once again, when you take a sprout, it becomes anywhere between 17 and 57 times more digestible. Here's the other aspect of a sprout. When you germinate it, the proteins become amino acids. It already is a pre-digested food. So I've had the privilege to train 17 Olympic athletes that all won medals of some type. Not all gold, but some bronze, silver, and some golds. And when we put them on this program, as before my time, they did Muhammad Ali, who won 2 of his fights on the Hippocrates diet, and Venus Williams, who's out there still playing world-class tennis. They all said the same thing to me. I've never felt stronger. I recover better because this Hippocrates diet is the highest usable and digestible protein diet on the planet Earth. Why I still have muscles and I'm strong is because I'm on this high sprout, high plant-based diet. Now, if you're saying you're taking ground up cooked protein powders to get 50, 100 grams, or if you're taking only nuts in high amounts, even though it's much better than an animal source, and even though you may need it emotionally when you leave behind animal carcasses, it's still a little taxing on you. So what we know, high protein period, is going to complicate and create disorders that a normal protein diet would not. You don't need excessive protein to get big muscle and strength. You need proper protein that comes in and goes out.
Thank you. Marco says a plant-based diet should always, a plant-based diet always tends to be high in oxalates, and supposedly it should be low. So she wants to know how much oxalate do sprouts have, and how can she find out how much does she have in her body?
Well, to give an example, if you talk about oxalic acids, that's what oxalates are. It comes from something called oxalic acid. You know, the most notable things that all of you hear about, and you read these things, because again, how they wake you up, how they get you interested is tell you how bad things are for you. And don't think there's not a little propaganda going on here from the dairy and the meat industry. There's a lot. They're called trolls today. And the fact of the matter is spinach has a lot of oxalates in it. Now, what's really interesting, if you eat raw spinach, you don't have the oxalic effect because it acts like a brilliant symphony, like the London Symphony. Now, if you just take the oboe player, because you've cooked the spinach, the oxalate is the oboe player. That's all you get. But if you have the entire symphonic orchestra there, it holds intact and in place the oxalates. So the way most people eat cooked food like that, yes, you're going to have oxalates. But if you compare it to the acidity that you get from animal-based foods that create the erosion of bones, the erosion of joints, the erosion of tissue, the creation of cancer, the creation of cardiovascular disease, It is incidental in consideration. When you germinate, the same thing. If you take a spinach seed and germinate it, it neutralizes and eliminates any oxalic acids from it.
Thank you again. So LG wants to know, why do goiters, if I'm saying that right, grow back?
Well, when a person has a lack of selenium and iodine in their diet long term, and the body has become familiar with the lack of those, that's why they will come back. There are certain geographic areas of the world where my wife's family is from, in the center part of Sweden. They end up with goiters all of the time. But if you look at the farming practices there that go back hundreds and hundreds, actually 1,000, 2,000 years, they've farmed out of that soil the selenium and the iodine way back then. We don't find these things in soil. They've never had, for instance, iodine in soil unless you're growing food near an ocean. So where that family's from, we're the Midwest, or in the middle of Canada somewhere, or Russia, they've never had the iodine there. And so this is the problem. So you've got to work with nutritional scientists who not only know what you need, but know the types and forms of these supplementations that are required. For instance, we use ionic forms of these. Ionic mean electrically charged. That it's similar to what you find in the electrically charged living food that the body's familiar with and attracts like a magnet to the absorption and the digestion of it.
Thank you. Joanna would like you to talk about how to deal with emotional and binge eating.
Well, that's what I was. Many of you don't know that I weighed 120 pounds more. I was an over-consumer, and it all started with mom and dad. You know, I was one of the blessed young men that I had parents that loved me, but they were like typical parents on a horribly bad diet. And mothers then, and unfortunately in great part today, were relegated to show love through food. Every single night, my mother would stand at the top of the table as she labored over making this food for us. And she just wanted us to say, thank you, Mom. The way that I was taught I was good, I was given cake. I was given candy. I was given ice cream. The same as you. But when I was bad, what did they do? They took that away from me. So the first dope pushers that you met most likely was your family. And they trained you when you were developing. Remember, between conception and 6 years old, 85% of your personality is developed. By the time you're 6, 85% is imprinted into who you are. Now, that can change with a lot of psychotherapy. And so you basically have these patterns. And at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 years old, that's what you've been trained. Good, sugar. Bad, no sugar. Now you're out on your own. You're lonely. You don't have a partner. You hate your job. Gathering of all of these things. Basically what happens, you're hiding in the closet eating food, or in front of the television eating food, like many of you have been with this plandemic, this false viral nonsense that they're putting around the world today to manipulate you even further. So how do you do it? First, you have to know you have a problem. No different than a drug addict or an alcoholic. People will always be an alcoholic, always be a drug addict until the day they wake up and say, wait a minute, this is the problem. That's the first step. Second step, you've got to get professional help. I did this on my own, and it took me a whole lot longer than it would have if I sat with a sound and sane person who was a guide for me. Now, I'm not suggesting that conventional psychologists or certainly psychiatrists are always the best choice. They may be. I mean, my close friend, Dr. Cousins, is a psychiatrist, and he would tell you just like me everything I've discussed tonight. But that's a rarity. And so here, every guest sees psychotherapists. We have gifted psychotherapists. Most important thing we do. And guests tell me how I've healed my disease, how I've stopped eating, how I've stopped abusing myself, is I found a way, the parachute, that I could jump out of that burning plane called my past life. And that's what we're doing. Just have to jump out. I know it's frightening. I had to go through pain and suffering and give up drugs called sugar and fats. I didn't dislike meat. I liked meat the day I gave it up a half a century ago. I loved ice cream. I literally would sit and eat 1 gallon of ice cream several times a week. That's not a joke. I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. So believe me, when you ask me this question, I understand it deeply. But if I could do it, you can do it. Get the help, get clear, and use certain supplementation. Why we gyrate, I want sugar, I want fat, I want this, I want that, is blood sugar is going up and down from the moment you get up until night when you go to bed. If you can take something like algae, specifically the least expensive chlorella, which is a complete protein, and take little bits of it, depending upon your weight, your size, 3 of them in the morning, 3-4 hours later, 3, regulate the blood sugar. Also, there are certain supplementation, depending upon the individual, we may use to take away the craving. And it always works once you're willing to get rid of the old and welcome in the new.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that's going to be helpful for a lot of people, especially I know some people in my family that could have that. So we're going to go into the last question. I'm going to blend 2, and that is about how much B12 should we consume, and does it matter if it's liquid or pill? And as well, if you could comment on the best sort of omega-3s to take, and if that's like an algae oil or not.
Well, the best company in the world is out of Norway. It's a bit pricey. It's ZINO. And they actually take sea algae, extract the omega oils out of it in very high concentrations, and you can take it. It takes care of DHA and everything. But less expensive and more available are a wide variety of algae. Every day I get up, as I did this morning, I take 5 types of algae. Now this isn't your need. Remember, I'm very excited about staying alive a long time and maintaining the busy schedule that I do. Right now I'm writing 4 books. One of my books I was working on today for a couple of hours. So blue-green algae, green algae, which is called chlorella, phytoplankton, and sea algae. Now, if you have little money, at least take blue-green. A little more, chlorella. A little more, phytoplankton. And the best source is actually out of Holland. The government of Holland actually put 9 billion euros into a plant that manufactures these extraordinarily beautiful organic aquatic plants. And sea algae, one we use as an extract, but you can eat them as we do on our dining table here. You know, nori rolls, guess what? It's made out of kelp. Dulse, arami, haziki, wakame. All of these are terrifically good foods. And in the Anglo community, rarely do we eat them. It's Asians that have been wise enough to do that over the years. We couldn't find a B12 in the market that we trusted. All of them were processed, all of them were chemicals. As you'll read in my book, Supplements Exposed, 91% of supplements on the market are made in laboratories out of oils, petrochemicals, the kind you have in your automobile. Vitamin Bs are made mostly out of coal tars. If you ever drove on a road, the blacktop is a coal tar. But let's go on to another subject. So we created a living form of B12 with a methyl that's extracted from algae without cooking it, without processing it. And so you may want to look into the Life Give B12 and the other Life Give supplements we have. You just need 1 a day unless you had a very, very severe deficiency. I would say 96 to 97% just 1 a day, because one that's usable, bacterial-rich B12 is adequate. Because once you put it into the body, a healthy body that's been fed prebiotics, cellulose from the salads and the foods that you're eating will grow it and grow it and grow it. It's not more is better, correct amounts are better in the right environment.
Thank you so much. We're done with the questions for today. There was still a lot, but I guess people can just watch your conferences and just learn a lot more from you. I'm going to pass it on to the VP, Petra. Just go ahead.
Wow. Dr. Brian Clement, what an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And we could have probably another hour of questions with you.
We'll come back again. We'll do it again sometime.
That would be fantastic. In a time of much needed conscious group support, thank you from everyone. And we appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to highlight what Dr. Clement talked about.
Yeah, you may want to look into our online program if you can't come here. We've never closed. The Institute's filled with people from all over. And don't forget the November 21st full day worldwide global conference that we're doing. And most important, stick together. Everything's going to be okay. We're not at the end of our rope. We're at the beginning of a whole new world. And if we just commit ourselves to values that are honest and good, we're going to be better than we were before. Be well till the next time we talk.
Thank you, Dr. Clement. Okay, so everyone will be unmuted now. And before we will be taking a 3-minute break before we will be moving into the breakout rooms. But as Brian Clement mentioned, wellness is wealth. On November 21st. We will be sending out a link with further information on this. It's the early bird registration for $27. It's an incredible event starting at 1 p.m., I believe. There will be an early bird registration for $27, and we will be sending out a link for this amazing presentation. We will be taking a 3-minute break now, and then we will be moving into our breakout rooms for some mastermind sessions. And if you're prompted to join a room, please do so. You should be all unmuted now.